Well, I think you can see that the March of Remembrance is about remembering, reconciling, and taking a stand. And I hope you also understand that one thing it is not is a political stunt or political statement. It's about the issues of the heart. And this is why we do what we do. If people wonder why we have the March of Remembrance every year, it's because there are issues of the heart that need to be resolved. So we're grateful for that. I would like to introduce you to our next speaker. And what he has to say will have an impact on how you view the actual memorial walk we're about to take. And we're honored to have him. We wanted to have a professor representing Rice University for obvious reasons. So I got on, since I didn't know any professors at Rice, I got online, great tool, and I looked through the bios of all the professors listed in the Department of History, and Professor Peter Caldwell, his bio really touched my heart. I happen to have some experience in Germany myself, so I scrutinized the topics of dissertations and things that he had published. And in addition to serving as the chairman of the Rice University History Department, Professor Caldwell is the Samuel McMahon Professor of History and a Humboldt Fellow. And his scholarly work has focused on the meanings of democracy and constitutionalism in Germany's First Republic, conservatism and state theory, legal theory and the welfare state, and the economics and law planning under state socialism. But not only is Professor Caldwell a gifted and thorough researcher, he also is an award-winning teacher at Rice. And we invited him to talk a bit about the death marches so you'll understand why we need marches of life. Dr. Caldwell, please come.
I want this conversation to continue. It's actually very moving. On the other hand, I know that we have a march, and so I want to go ahead and say a few words, move away from the experiences we're talking about, and provide some context to understand what these are, what we're actually commemorating right now. In mid-1944, the German army was in retreat. Heinrich Himmler, who was head of the SS and its massive apparatus across Eastern and Western Europe, apparatus of death and labor camps. He issued an order to the local commanders of camps. He ordered the commanders in an extreme case to quote-unquote evacuate the camps and keep the prisoners from falling into the hands of the Red Army. In other words, to keep the prisoners from being liberated. Now, here's an interesting question we historians asked. Why exactly did he do this? It's actually not clear. Was he aiming to save forced laborers being worked to death for the war effort? Was he aiming to keep prisoners as human shields or as bargaining chips? Was he aiming to hide the evidence and continue the killing? It's actually not clear from the record, which means that the orders came down to the local commanders to make their own decisions about what the death camps were going to be. Many of these local commanders, of course, old SS men. All of the motives played a role. The chaos and disorder of the end of the war added to the chaos of the Nazi regime itself, which was chaotic, and order was given without a clear purpose to the local commanders. In early 1945, the Red Army was reaching the camps in the east. Local commanders ordered in toto around 700,000 prisoners. The largest group of these prisoners was Jewish. There were also POWs and political prisoners in that group. They were ordered to march. Where? These rows of prisoners, let's imagine the moment. These rows of prisoners were not alone moving westward. They were accompanied by hundreds of thousands, eventually millions of others, especially ethnic Germans, moving westward in front of the Red Army. But the prisoners were different. They were poorly clothed. They were ill-fed. They were exhausted. And let's recall, I said there's a number of different prisoners marching. The ones who were in the worst shape, the ones treated worse in the camp, were the Jews. Meanwhile, the ethnic Germans moving westward as well were being inundated with propaganda about what the Red Army was going to do with them, associating Jews with Bolsheviks. The killing began. Already we're talking about the coldness of late January 1945. As individual prisoners stumble, the initial killing begins. Individual guards shoot them. They take matters into their own hands. Why? They think that might be what this prison march is about. Or, more likely, many of them are trying to save their own lives, get rid of the people who are going too slow as they move away from the Red Army. They increasingly single out groups they think are less able to march, especially leading Jewish women. They murder them. You have to imagine on these roads, as all these people are moving across them to the west, there are increasing numbers of bodies in the cold, in the snow, in shallow graves. And in some cases, SS officers begin to carry out especially sadistic acts. Civilians participated as well. Not all, but there were certainly cases where civilians were part of the atrocities. Not all the victims were Jewish. In at least one case, an historian found a French POW was beaten to death. He was called a Jewish Bolshevik by the civilians who participated. This last point is important for our march today. The Nazi regime coded certain people as enemies, singled them out for elimination. The killing and the death marches bore traces of this coding. It coded the killing going on there. It took specific forms also related to the chaos of the war, but it connects to the overall sense of the Nazi regime. In the end, over a third of the estimated 700,000 in the death marches, which occurred at different times in different places, over a third perished. This is the logic of anti-Semitism and racism. Our purpose today, when we see the resurgence of racism and extremism in our schools, which my daughter here in Houston has sadly reported, in our communities, in our politics, we need to fight the resurgence of this extremism, of this racism, of this anti-Semitism as we can. Thank you.